Most disasters in life don't arrive without warning. The failed relationship, the toxic job, the business partnership that ends in betrayal. The strange part is that people often saw the signs long before everything fell apart. They felt something was wrong, but they kept going anyway. So, the real question is not why bad things happen. It's why we ignore the warnings that come before them. Most people like to think of themselves as rational. We believe that important decisions are made through careful analysis, logical thinking, and objective evidence. We are taught to trust numbers over feelings, explanations over instincts, and certainty over ambiguity. And in many situations, that approach works. But there is a strange pattern that appears throughout life. People often look back on their biggest mistakes and say the same thing. I knew something felt off. Not after the disaster happened. Not after the truth was revealed. Before the betrayal. Before the burnout. Before the financial loss. Before the regret. Somewhere in the background, there was already a quiet signal. Yet modern life has conditioned us to dismiss these signals. We are surrounded by endless information, constant opinions, and a culture that demands explanations for everything. If something cannot be measured, calculated, or proven immediately, we are told not to trust it. As a result, many people have become highly informed about the world around them, while becoming increasingly disconnected from the intelligence within them. The real problem is not that people lack information. It is that they no longer trust one of the oldest forms of intelligence they possess. Most people think intuition is the opposite of logic. It isn't. Intuition is often logic that has not yet reached consciousness. It is a result of thousands of observations, experiences, patterns, and subtle signals being processed beneath the surface of awareness. Long before your mind can explain what is wrong, another part of you may have already detected it. The tragedy of modern life is that we have learned how to analyze almost everything, but we have forgotten how to listen. We trust external data more than internal signals. And when the two come into conflict, we usually silence the voice that has been protecting human beings long before logic, language, or technology ever existed. This is Mind Over System, where we explore the hidden systems, patterns, and forces that shape the way we think, decide, and live, often without us even realizing it. Most people imagine intuition as something mysterious, a feeling, a hunch, a voice that appears from nowhere. But intuition rarely comes from nowhere. In reality, intuition is often the result of experience compressed into a form that can be accessed instantly. Think about how an experienced doctor walks into a room and immediately senses that something is wrong with a patient before seeing the test results. Or how a veteran investor becomes uncomfortable during a meeting long before a company's financial problems become obvious. Or how an experienced parent can tell that something is troubling their child without hearing a single word. What looks like intuition from the outside is often pattern recognition happening at incredible speed. Every conversation you have ever had, every mistake you have ever made, every success, disappointment, warning sign, and observation leaves a trace inside the brain. Most of these memories never remain available to conscious thought. You cannot recall them one by one, but your nervous system can. Over time, the brain begins to recognize recurring patterns, a certain tone of voice, a certain type of confidence, a certain behavioral inconsistency, a certain atmosphere in a room. Individually, these signals may seem insignificant. Together, they create a pattern. And when that pattern resembles something dangerous, familiar, or important, intuition activates. The strange thing is that your conscious mind often receives the conclusion before it receives the explanation. You feel discomfort before you understand why. You hesitate before you can justify it. You sense risk before you can articulate it. This is why intuition can feel irrational, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it operates faster than conscious reasoning. Long before human beings built spreadsheets, business models, or scientific frameworks, survival depended on recognizing patterns quickly. The people who sensed danger before they could explain it were often the people who survived. In many ways, intuition is not a supernatural gift. It is ancient intelligence moving faster than language. If intuition is ancient intelligence, then the body is often its messenger. This is where many people become uncomfortable, because modern culture teaches us to trust thoughts far more than sensations. We trust what we can explain. We distrust what we can only feel. Yet the human body is constantly collecting information that never reaches conscious awareness. Every facial expression, every change in tone, every hesitation, every inconsistency between words and behavior, every subtle shift in an environment. The conscious mind can only focus on a limited amount of information at once. But the nervous system is absorbing far more than we realize. Sometimes the result appears as a feeling that something is off, a strange tension in your chest during a conversation, an unexplained discomfort around a person everyone else seems to admire, a persistent feeling that a decision is wrong despite all the logical arguments supporting it. Most people dismiss these experiences because they cannot immediately explain them. But explanation and detection are not the same thing. A smoke detector does not understand fire. It simply detects the signals that usually come before one. The body often works in a similar way. It notices patterns before the conscious mind can assemble a coherent story. This is why many people later describe disasters with the same sentence. I knew something wasn't right. Not because they could predict the future, but because their nervous system had already detected inconsistencies that their conscious mind chose to ignore. And this is where the most expensive mistakes in life are often made. Not when there are no warning signs, but when the warning signs are present and we talk ourselves out of listening. We call it being rational. We call it staying optimistic. We call it giving someone another chance. But sometimes what we call rational thinking is simply the refusal to confront an uncomfortable truth. Because the moment you accept what your intuition is telling you, action becomes unavoidable. You may need to leave. You may need to change. You may need to admit that something you invested years into is not going to work. And for many people, that reality feels more painful than continuing down the wrong path. So they silence the signal. Not because the signal is weak, but because the consequences of hearing it are too strong. This is why intuition is not merely about sensing. It is also about courage. The courage to acknowledge what you already know before reality forces you to acknowledge it for you. If intuition is built from experience, and if the body constantly sends signals before conscious awareness catches up, then an important question remains. Why do so many people seem disconnected from their intuition today? The answer may have less to do with human nature and more to do with the environment we now live in. For most of human history, silence was normal. Periods of reflection were unavoidable. People spent far more time alone with their thoughts, their surroundings, and their internal experiences. Today, that silence has almost disappeared. The average person wakes up and immediately enters a stream of notifications, messages, headlines, videos, opinions, advertisements, and endless digital stimulation. Every spare moment is filled. Every moment of boredom is eliminated. Every uncomfortable emotion can be escaped with a swipe. The modern world has become extraordinarily efficient at capturing attention, but in the process, it has made self-awareness increasingly difficult. Because intuition rarely shouts. It whispers. It appears in moments of stillness. It emerges during reflection. It becomes visible when the noise subsides. The problem is that modern systems are not designed to create stillness. They are designed to create engagement. Every platform competes for more of your attention. Every algorithm competes to keep you scrolling. Every source of stimulation trains the brain to seek the next input. As a result, many people become highly connected to the world while becoming increasingly disconnected from themselves. And when that happens, intuition becomes harder to hear, not because it disappears, but because it is constantly being drowned out. This creates a dangerous illusion. People believe they need more information, more advice, more opinions, more content. But often the missing piece is not additional information. It is the ability to hear the signals that are already there. The uncomfortable feeling before accepting the wrong job. The hesitation before entering the wrong relationship. The exhaustion that appears long before burnout. The quiet realization that a path no longer aligns with who you are becoming. These signals rarely arrive as certainty. They arrive as subtle discomfort. And in a culture obsessed with speed, productivity, and constant stimulation, subtle signals are often the first things to be ignored. The irony is that humanity has never had more information available, yet many people have never felt more lost, because information can tell you what is happening in the world, but intuition often tells you what is happening within yourself. And no amount of external knowledge can fully replace that. The evidence for intuition is not hidden in laboratories. It is hidden in ordinary life. A founder ignores a growing sense that a business partner cannot be trusted. Months later, the partnership collapses. An employee spends years convincing themselves that the stress is temporary. Then one day they wake up completely exhausted, wondering how burnout arrived so suddenly. A person enters a relationship despite noticing small inconsistencies from the very beginning. They explain them away, rationalize them, minimize them, until those same inconsistencies eventually become impossible to ignore. What makes these stories fascinating is that the final outcome often feels predictable in hindsight. Not because the future was obvious, but because the warning signs were present long before the consequences appeared. Psychologists call this pattern recognition. Investors call it experience. Athletes call it instinct. Military strategists call it situational awareness. Different names. The same phenomenon. The ability to recognize meaningful signals before conscious reasoning can fully explain them. The people who consistently make better decisions are not always those with the highest intelligence. Often, they are the ones who learn to recognize these signals before reality turns them into consequences. You've probably experienced this before. You meet someone. Nothing is obviously wrong. They're charming, confident, likable, yet something inside you hesitates. Not enough to walk away. Just enough to make you uneasy. So you ignore it. Months later, the lies appear. The manipulation becomes visible. The contradictions become impossible to miss. And suddenly, you find yourself saying the same sentence millions of people have said before. I knew it. Not because you predicted the future, but because part of you had already recognized the pattern long before your conscious mind could explain it. Intuition did not see what was coming. It saw what was already there. The greatest danger is not making the wrong decision. It is learning to ignore yourself. Every time intuition warns you and you look away, a message is sent. My perception cannot be trusted. Over time, something shifts. You stop listening. You stop noticing. You stop believing what you already know. And when that happens, life becomes strangely easy to manipulate. Because a person who no longer trusts their own signals will eventually follow someone else's. The crowd, the trend, the algorithm, the system. That is why intuition is not just about avoiding mistakes. It is about preserving your ability to think for yourself. Intuition is not a voice telling you what to do. It is the tension between what you know and what you refuse to admit. That is why it rarely feels comforting. It appears when something is out of alignment, a relationship that no longer feels right, a decision that betrays your values, a path that no longer belongs to the person you are becoming. The discomfort is not the problem. The discomfort is the message. And the longer it is ignored, the louder life must become to deliver it. The goal is not to obey intuition. The goal is to stop ignoring it. Intuition is not a verdict. It is an invitation to look closer, to pause, to question, to pay attention to what your conscious mind may have overlooked. The wisest people are not those who blindly follow every feeling. They are the ones who become curious when a feeling refuses to leave. Because intuition does not demand belief. It demands investigation. And sometimes, that single moment of honesty is enough to change the direction of an entire life. Maybe intuition is not a gift. Maybe it is the part of you that recognizes the truth before the rest of you is ready to accept it. And in a world full of noise, that may be more valuable than ever. When that part of you speaks, will you listen?